love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same. Will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same. Never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, then all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same. Will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same. Will never be the same ever again. Given my all to you. Be still and know the Lord. Be still.
And God's will is simple. The most wretched man in hell will not be Adolf Hitler. The most wretched man in hell, or woman, will not be one like Joe Stalin or some of these more modern devils. The most wretched person in hell will be a former Seventh-day Adventist.
Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. This is actually take 2 of my Doug Hackleman interview, which sadly halfway through just stopped and froze. I couldn't log back in, couldn't fix it, had to reboot everything. And so it's a shame. There were hundreds of comments, but I will upload this one right now, going live to YouTube, Rumble for the first time today, Twitter, Facebook, and this is the book that Douglas Hackleman put together, Misadventures in Stewardship. Who watches? Who cares? It's a fantastic read. My interview with him 6 years ago now, that we are finally uploading to a public platform, was incredible. He is an amazing individual, has observed and written about many aspects of Adventism. And so I am going to be replaying what I just did, and we'll delete the previous one, and this will be the one that stands, and hopefully halfway through doesn't do the same thing. Fingers crossed. So yeah, this is season 2, episode 42, Douglas Hackleman. It's a replay, but never before seen on the public world outside of our private Facebook group. It's even not there anymore. Facebook has deleted all of the old live videos. In fact, I'm hoping that as I get closer to the end of the 86 interviews, that they are all still saved somewhere. It would be sad to have lost that incredible record. Season 2, where we really dug deep into Glacier View, what went on, the trial of Desmond Ford. So we talk about, in this interview, as I said, it's 2026 now, and we're going back in time to 2020. Doug and I talk about a lot of topics, but nestled in there is some really good insights into Des Ford and Glacier View and what went down. So sit back and relax. And if you watched about 2 hours in and then wondered where we went, just come back, watch this later, go in around 2 hours and watch to the end. Well, without further ado, here we go. Douglas Hackleman. Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. I'm Peter Dixon, your host for today, and my very special guest is Douglas Hackleman. Great to have you here, Doug.
My pleasure, for sure.
I love your office there. It looks like a place of interest and like a cottage industries kind of going on.
I kind of wish it was. It's actually the office of my employer.
Oh, okay.
School of Dentistry in Loma Linda, where we put out the publications, the alumni journal and things like that.
Right. I'm envious of your comfortable seat. I've actually got one coming. We thought we had it for last week, but I've got an old school chair right now that, as I saw yours in the background, that's very similar to mine, which hopefully is coming this afternoon. So
You have Amazon where you live?
We do, yes. Yeah. I'm not sure if the Australian Amazon, someone will be able to tell us in the comments, has an actual warehouse in Australia yet. They have an office, and we definitely can buy products, but a lot of them come from the States, I think. So now, I thought for a moment there, looking at the books in the background, that maybe they were boxes of your book, the Who Watches, Who Cares, and that you were shipping them out still.
There's a couple of copies back there, but
so I thought, oh yes. Now I have a copy of that too. I'll just
been 13 years since that thing came out, I think.
just to confirm.
Old news.
Yeah, very good read.
Thank you.
Just before we officially start the interview, even though we already have, the Walter Ray book, Pirates of Privilege, that never really saw the light of day. Can you tell us a bit about that, and did you use it as a resource for your book at all?
Oh, no, I didn't use it at all for my writing, but I had a lot of contact with Walter Ray from probably around 1980, 79 or 80, when some friends that went to his church in Long Beach, California, took us with them there one Sabbath, and we ended up at their home, and he came to the house with, probably 10 or 12 other guests, and we ate, and then we sat around in a big circle, and Walter passed old books around to all of us, and each one he would say what page to turn to, and then he said, I'm going to read from, and he'd read out of one of Ellen White's books, and we had all these other books, and it made it really obvious what he was trying to get across.
Boy, that would have been an interesting conversation to have videoed.
Yeah, it was a little. My wife and I went home that afternoon just a little sick.
I bet. So he handed out like Edersheim and a few other books.
And, Melville, whoever.
And did he just say to randomly open the books, or did he tell you pages to go to?
Yeah, he tells the page. Yeah, he had a key.
So I've said on other interviews when I read The White Lie, it must have been 1984 or 1985, I think, that I started trying to read it. And I was only probably 22 or something at the time, and I just couldn't read it. And it wasn't real. Like I was just so shocked from, like you said, you went home with your wife and you felt sick. I felt sick, and I think because of the elevation I'd had Ellen White in my mind to start a whole kind of chain reaction of questions in my head was just explosive, really.
And that book could have been so much more effective if he'd have let somebody work it over before he sent it out.
I know. It's funny, even as a young person, I had that thought going through my head that I wish someone had edited it, because it was just, like I said, an explosion of information that was not only difficult to take on board because of the content, but because it was just an explosion of words and ideas and
anger.
Anger and I wonder who owns the rights to that. Does he have family that look after that now?
That was, like I said, around 1980, 79, 80. And then I was at Walter's home up in Patterson, California, where he owned, he retired to an orchard. I can't remember a walnut orchard, I think it was, or almonds. And he did people's taxes and tended the orchard. And guy had a lot of practical talents. But he was, you didn't talk with Walter, he talked to you. Everybody had the same experience, and Walter and I had a bit of a falling out probably in the mid 80s when I chided him slightly about when the story of the Piscataway farmer from February of 1845 came out. The Israel Damon story. I don't know if you're familiar.
No, can you tell us that story and then continue on with the Walter Ray story?
Yeah, Israel Damon and Ellen White and Ellen Harmon and James White were traveling in what she later described as her first missionary journey to upstate, to New England and Maine mostly. And it was January, February, and they went from town to town in a sled with an older minister named Israel Damon. So they were single. They weren't married. Weren't planning to marry at that point, as far as we know. And this was not considered cool by the standards of the day to have a man and a woman traveling who were not chaperoned or whatever. Anyway, Ellen White describes how she went from town to town fighting fanaticism that followed the Great Disappointment. And I'm trying to think of the name of the young man. Bruce Weaver was a graduate student at seminary from somewhere in the southern United States. One of the conferences was sponsoring him there. And he had access to, I think he worked for the White Estate branch at Andrews. And he was becoming discouraged with his beliefs. And he was talking to Walter Ray fairly regularly by phone and feeding him the stuff he was finding in what later was termed the Z file in the Ellen White Estate, stuff that they hadn't ever shared with anybody, things that didn't sound good and were problematic. And but he was also finding examples. This would be 1980, when he was finding examples of source usage on his own and then giving them to Walter. I actually have a cassette carrier of some kind with 6 or 8 cassettes of their phone calls that I haven't listened much to.
Oh my goodness.
Bruce gave them to me. But so Walter was getting a lot of stuff from this graduate student at seminary who was becoming disillusioned, and then he dropped out, became a Xerox or one of the big copier machine corporations on the East Coast hired him to go from place to place to big companies and help them troubleshoot their machinery. And in the process of doing that up and down the Eastern Seaboard, he would go to courts and to historical societies and libraries looking for evidence of one story and her telling later that particularly bothered him. It was the story of the evening in Atkinson, Maine, Saturday evening in Atkinson, Maine, where Israel Damon, the older man, was holding a meeting, and White and James White and Ellen Harmon were there with him, and the police came and arrested them. And she talks about how first they were like the constable and 2 or 3 assistants came in, and they couldn't, for some reason, couldn't arrest him, couldn't get him out of the room. And then he brought in 3 or 4 more people. Short version of the story is that eventually he had 12 men there, deputies, assistants, people he called on, to try to get Israel Damon where he had fallen helplessly on the floor, and the saints of God, with their faces lit up with his glory, as she described it, did nothing to intervene. But these 12 men could not pick up Israel Damon and move him out of the room, out of the house. And she said, finally, we decided, and the Spirit agreed, or the Spirit decided, and we agreed that it would be good that if he were taken. And they were able to pick him up as easily as a little baby and carried him off. And, just on the face of it, the story sounds difficult to believe. If I was in, and she said they would run out of the house every now and then because they couldn't stand whatever the aura was in the room, and then they would come back and try some more. Well, so what Bruce Weaver eventually found was a Bangor, Maine newspaper weekly called the Piscataqua Farmer from February of 1845 that had a full page of newspaper on his front that was it was an excerpted or abridged testimony from all the people the next day who testified in court at his arraignment. There were 30 people. About half of them were in favor and half of them against him, probably, but they were all at the meeting, and they were all describing basically the same thing. And Ellen had laid on the floor for 4 or 5 hours, off and on in vision, and every once in a while she would rise up and point to someone and tell their case, as the witnesses said. And the constable said, when he testified, that the place was one continuous shout. It was just bedlam. And he says, my deputies and I came, and he said I had to call in help because the women clung to him and he clung to them, and they didn't use batons back then, and they couldn't get him apart. And finally, they managed to get him out of there. But so Bruce had read this story in her version and just thought there must be some records of this. There must be maybe the court record even. So we ended up in my magazine, the last issue. In fact, we have pictures of the courthouse. We had the pictures of the attorney who was helping him and the prosecutor, and of course the entire Piscataqua Farmer copy of what each witness said.
Wow. And
what I did was elaborated on he sent me a he sent me a story with it that was kind of like what Walter Ray does, just
Spews it out.
spews, yeah. And I just went through it and put in so many footnotes indicating things that Ellen claimed that she was fighting. The fanaticism she said she was fighting, and I gave examples found in the contemporary record of most of them she was already involved in, like rebaptism and shouting and the holy kiss, promiscuous foot washing, as they called it. Although she specified women could wash men's feet, but not the other way around.
Right. She pointed that out.
Yeah, so this is all documented in this long story that demonstrates to my satisfaction that her version of the story was bollocks.
Incredible. On so many levels. It's interesting.
When Bruce found this rare document or early document that had so much to say, here you have the earliest contemporary account of Ellen Harmon in vision, like 4 months after the disappointment. And believe me, the White Estate and the GC and the Review, nobody has ever even let our people know that it exists. They won't even argue against it because that might get more attention. But when Bruce sent it to me and he called and asked if I wanted an article about it, I said, sure, just be sure you don't give it to Walter Ray. But I knew Walter would not be able to resist the temptation to send copies to all the leading brethren with a cover letter. And but that's what ended up happening.
Right.
And so our competition, I don't know if you want to call it that, at Spectrum, I knew they would, if they found out about it, I knew they would rush something into print, which they did. And they got, because I knew that the chair of the history department at Glacier, for some years I had known he had found something really, really problematic in his meandering through microfiche of old newspapers on a sabbatical he'd taken, but he was afraid to share it with anybody because he thought he'd lose his job. And as soon as Bruce called me and told me what he had, I thought that's what Fred Hoyt had. And it turned out to be true. That was what it was. So they got Ron Graybill and Jonathan Butler and I'm not sure who else, and they sat around and talked about this document, and there's a transcript of that in the Inspector, but there's nothing like what we had with 130 footnotes and making it real.
Yeah.
But so I told, and so Bruce had gotten Walter Ray to promise not to share it with anybody when he let him have it, but he broke the promise. I said, Walter, that really wasn't. And he just basically hung up on me.
Wow.
We never talked again.
Really?
Even though I've been to his home many times, and I didn't come down on him like a load of bricks. I just said, really, that's Bruce, you kind of betrayed Bruce's trust there with that. That's not okay.
Yeah. That's understandable. I wonder if the psychological damage of Adventism skews people's kind of ethics sometimes.
Well, Walter, I believe, was much more badly. I mean, you never know what anybody's resting psychological state of being is, and what his is, I don't know or was. But he'd been a big fan and promoter of Ellen's writings in his sermons and his.
Yes. Yeah.
And then when he became betrayed, I guess you could say, that just. He just wanted so badly to fight back, to lash out at the people that kept her trust after that, in terms of the writing and publishing.
I wonder if as he came to his very last years, he looked back with, a sense of accomplishment, or if he looked back with some regrets of how he kind of acted and processed the material.
He reminds me a little bit of Donald Trump in the he doesn't edit himself, it just
right
comes out exactly as, if he's angry, it comes out. It's like he's on Twitter,
I was just going to say, imagine Walter Ray with a Twitter account.
Yeah. Fun to watch. Get the popcorn.
Yeah. And the material you're talking about there, you released on Adventist Currents,
The last issue, yes.
the last issue. Was that why it was the last issue?
No, we just never made enough money hardly to thrive, and I was taking the best years of my life to not make hardly any money.
What years was the Adventist Currents kind of
83 to 88.
83 to 88, yeah. See, it's one of the few missing links, actually, for me to have not really dug into, because I was at Avondale 81. I then did a couple of years of surfing, and then I graduated in 85. And then I went to New Zealand, and it was 84 that I started reading The White Lie and just couldn't cope with it. But there was a lot of material in that time period that I've since gone back and explored. In the early 90s, I really started exploring a lot of that stuff. And Ron Number's book was really helpful with that, because it's a much more articulate offering. And we had Ron Numbers on the show with John Butler. It was absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, they're both good storytellers.
Yeah, and
especially John.
yes. In fact, people said, "Oh, why didn't you have them as two separate interviews?"
Yeah.
But Ron, before Ron had met me, he didn't really know what this was about, and so he said, "Oh, I'll only do it if John joins me." But afterwards, the three of us hit it off like a house on fire, and so I'm going to be getting them back separately. Definitely John. I'm not sure if Ron is that interested in digging deep back into Adventism, but his work was really impactual on me. A lot of the Des Ford stuff, Bob Brinsmead's re-examining 1844 was a real influence, and so I've been digging back and always been fascinated with Adventist history, and I've heard mention of Adventist Currents. And you've really inspired me today to go, that's one publication I haven't really dug deep into that I know a lot of people have, and it's been mentioned a lot on the program in previous interviews. How can that be accessed these days? Are you promoting it all still? What's happening with it?
It's really easy. If you just go to www.hacksplace.com.
Right.
HACKS place.com.
Okay.
Part of my name and place and .com.
Yeah, so just hacksplace.com. Okay,
Yeah.
well, I encourage everyone to go there, and I'll certainly be going there this afternoon and digging deep. And one of the great things about this social media platform we've got is people watching often put links in the comments, and usually within a couple of days the interviews have had over 1,000 views and hundreds of comments. So it's a fascinating kind of way to... It's like a publication that's interactive. I'm really enjoying it.
Almost like a pandemic, huh?
It's
a small world after all.
Where's your mask? You were going to wear it when you hopped on before.
Forget about viruses on the internet,
That's right. Don't pass that internet virus to me, please.
Yeah.
Hey, so can you tell us a little bit about your own family background? Where you were born, were you born an Adventist, and how did you come into the church if you weren't born one?
I don't remember much about it, but I was born in Springfield, Ohio, and my grandfather on my dad's side lived there and was in charge of a tool and die shop. And my dad came out to Loma Linda and got an MD degree in '44, I think it was. And when I was, we went to Bangkok, Thailand as missionaries. My parents did. And I had an older sister that was severely handicapped with cerebral palsy. And then there was a new baby girl who went with us. And we were there for 4 years, came back in 1959. And it just to mention as part of my probably failed social skills growing up was my dad was working constantly and my mother was preoccupied with my sisters, and I basically raised myself. Wow. And I went to a mission school there that had become place where Chinese merchants who had escaped the Chinese Revolution came from Formosa, then it was called Taiwan, and came to Bangkok and resumed being entrepreneurs, and they were successful very quickly, and they wanted their kids to learn English and be entrepreneurs, so they didn't care about the Adventism, but it was a place where their kids could go to school and learn English. So every single one of my classmates was Chinese in grade school.
Wow.
And that was difficult because they were all a little older than me, and I didn't understand developmental age, so
You had to grow up fast.
you get excluded from everything, or you get made fun of, and you get discounted, and
Yeah.
and you can't do as well as easily as they can in hardly anything. Finally figured it out, later on. But then you come home to the States, Syracuse, New York, where my dad took a residency for 2 years, and I'd never played baseball, basketball, football. I never heard a popular song in my life until that point. And so those transitions were formative,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah. And so then as you come back home, you're suddenly an outsider there as well, because you've just come from a place
Also,
where you were an outsider also.
I don't know anything. But on the other hand, the school system in Thailand was the British school system. And in 7th and 8th grade, I didn't have anything I needed to do. I knew it all already, literally.
Mm.
Bad habits then develop, You sit and read library books while everyone else is in class all day, every day. So I slept walk through high school at Tacoma Academy in Washington, D.C. And, my nature, none of us makes our nature. We don't conceive ourselves. We don't select our genes or what environment they interact with. Our parents pretty much determine that. So how we come to be who we are, I don't know. But I have too many interests, too many curiosities. That's why I'm poor. I never settled on one thing or even one area in which to write if I was going to be a writer. Mm. And the psych major I took in the graduate school in psychology was just because I didn't know what else to do. And I taught at Glacier a couple of years, and decided I wasn't interested enough in either psychology or teaching to stick with it. And I began pursuing entrepreneurial interests in art. And then I started becoming curious about my religious roots. My wife and I are both that way. We were always going to the extracurricular programs around the university that had to do with theology, and began wondering about the ongoing conflicts, in the church, among, especially in soteriology, the variations of how we were saved and why, and the questions about
what era was this? Sorry to interrupt. I just want to get a placement for it.
Yeah, this would be 72, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Okay, right.
And and we had two guys on our campus who were semi-charismatic. One was Graham Maxwell, and one was Jack Pravancha, a physician ethicist. They both had very popular Sabbath school class, and both of them contested very seriously and regularly the traditional substitutionary view of the atonement. So that was the first major theological issue that I was faced with that was different, and then I tried to figure out how would I decide whether that was better or worse or biblical or non-biblical or what. And I ended up writing my first paper about these issues when Jeffrey Paxton was starting to come around North America with his shaking of Adventism, and I was pissed off that Neil Wilson and the church leaders didn't want to let him be allowed to speak in our different churches, and so I wrote about that.
Where did you write about that?
Just a paper that I generated and circulated, but then I found out later that the seminary professors were giving it, or requiring some of their students to read it. Wow! Not because they agreed with it, but as a jumping off point for
discussion.
The Raoul Deterans and I'm trying to think of the other guy who was the guy I'm trying to think of. Used to pass out and recommend Lewis Word's books, his little books on the moral purpose of prophecy.
Yeah. And where were they handing them out?
At seminary, one of the professors, I'm trying to think of his name, Hans Laurendell.
Right. Yes. Okay. Yeah, his name's come up.
Yeah, back in the 70s, he was a big name at the seminary, and he and Raoul Dedrin.
Dedrin. Yeah. Yeah. His name's come up too. Yeah. So you're kind of already exploring a lot of this kind of within Adventism considered controversial material. Early 70s. Did you kind of?
Well, no, the exploration of those issues didn't come of the theological issue. I didn't write that till like 79 or so, or 80. Whenever it was Paxton came around.
Right. Okay.
Up to that point, it was just going to the Sabbath school classes and talking with people. And but I wrote to Des Ford when he was at PUC, and we had a couple of long letter exchanges about this issue. And then right after Glacier View, I was by that time the local Adventist Forum chapter president, and I went to Glendale to hear him at their forum chapter in Los Angeles on Friday night. And my wife and I drove him back out to our house where we kept him overnight, and I introduced him the next afternoon at our presentation. This is right after Glacier View, and so we got to talk about it a little bit too. But we never reconciled over that, but we enjoyed each other's company, and it was really fun when he stayed with us. When we finished talking and he was heading off to bed, we had a room for him. I had put the Standish Brothers' big publication on the bedside stand there, so that when he comes out a minute later with the thing in his hand, just cracking up. What are you doing? He knew I wasn't sympathetic to them, the twins. But.
No. He got your sense of humor, though.
We got on well.
Oh, that's.
But on the way back from Glendale, I never argued with him, but I said, "Where do you see the subsidiary? Where do you see a forensic justification in the prodigal son story?" And he said, "Well, I wouldn't want to use a parable to do theology." He said, "Jesus was not a theologian. Paul was a theologian." And
interesting answer.
I found that very unsatisfactory answer, but I didn't. We'd already been through the issues, so I didn't.
That would have been a very interesting question to unpack further, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Wow. Did you feel that he was trying to just stop the conversation by saying that?
I don't think he was trying to stop it, but I think he could see immediately the internal inconsistency of the Heavenly Father that welcomes home even without asking forgiveness, but it just doesn't jive with, I've got to have that.
Yeah. I relate more to that. I'd rather extrapolate my righteousness by faith from the parable than from the theology of Paul myself.
For sure. And, Paul, of course, had, if you really get into Paul and his background and what was going on in the church at the time, you couldn't argue with Paul. He'd had a direct, supernatural experience. So he had authority. He didn't have to go to any scripture and reconcile. He just. I know. So how do you argue with somebody like that?
It's like parallels with Ellen White right there, isn't there?
Exactly.
I've often, and I'm thinking out loud here, I've often pondered the similarities there, to be able to claim certain authority, but then humbly, present it to the followers as something that, sure, follow it from the Bible. I'm hesitating with what I'm saying.
Well, Peter, what happened to me after several years of doing fairly deep research into the archives and stuff in the Ella White estate and the letters and papers that I was able to access, and finding so many things at every juncture that didn't seem right, or that didn't fit the story as I've been told it. Didn't fit the claims as presented. And some of them are set out in detail in the magazine. I began saying to myself, so this is how a religion can start.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is it possible Christianity, I mean, and Mormonism, which I think
Yeah.
is crazier than anything about Adventism,
Mm.
and obviously clearly more violent and more political, but they are a positive cultural economic force in the United States. I'd rather have them for neighbors, generally speaking, than the average member of the American population.
Mm.
Same with most Adventists. They're probably not going to hurt you.
Mm. Mm.
But so I believe these religions, however it is they get started, and their origins seem strange and almost crazy to me.
Mm.
It's ironic how much good they do in the world as well.
I know. And that's where people then go, well, okay, well, I don't believe these, like a lot of the academics and scholars will say, well, I don't actually believe anything supernatural happened in 1844 that night, but look at the providential nature of Adventism. And you can't argue that, but there's also something you feel uncomfortable about, where it rose from, the source of it. You still feel a bit uncomfortable about it. And on the one hand, you can say, yeah, great schools, great education system, great hospitals, incredible community.
Good around the world, you know?
Yeah, around the world, beautiful people.
Live longer than other people.
Yeah, yeah. And then on the other hand, you go, but boy, that kind of shocks me and annoys me in a way that, for example, with your story, she's claiming to travel around to kind of quell the fires of fanaticism, and yet and then to create an urban myth about one of her events, and then to find out that actually they were more fanatical than all the fanaticists put together. How do you kind of juggle those two things? Like,
well, and the same thing with Christianity. There's a terrifically written book by David Bentley Hart called Atheist Delusions. I think it came out 2 or 3 years ago. It's as good of expository writing as I have ever read.
It's called what? Atheist
Delusions.
Delusions, yeah.
And in that book, he's chiding the new atheists for their sneering at Christianity.
Right.
Saying, I'm not here to establish the truth of Christianity. I'm just here to show you blankety blanks who don't seem to know the history of Christianity in the world and what it wrought. And he sets it out. It's unbelievably wonderful stuff.
I'll check that out. What's his name?
David Bentley Hart.
Right. I'll check that out. And maybe someone watching can put a link there.
Just most fantastic expository writing. But he's telling you lots of things about the history of the Western world from the time of the early church on, and what they did that was useful, positive, or growth producing to the wider world.
Yeah.
Science, of course, too. Rodney Stark's books about for the honor of heaven. Rodney Stark is a sociologist who writes history,
right?
History of science a lot, and he demonstrates a lot of the good things that how so much of the growth in modern cosmology came out of Catholic clerics.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm looking forward to looking into that. Again, it creates just a bigger picture for you, doesn't it? You look into different perspectives, you look into backgrounds, you look into a lot of people's perspectives of a certain topic, and you start to grasp a better view of a certain situation or event, which is what's happening here. This is interview number 42, and it's about Glacier View. Like, this is 42 of this season or this series, and I'm certainly getting an opportunity to get a much better picture of Adventism, and particularly the Glacier View era. Just a little aside thing that's happened to me. There's a local group of people. So being a musician, you soon learn that you do play weddings, parties, bar mitzvahs, everything you can to put food on the table. The dream of, when you're young, I'll put out an album, I'll travel, and I'll make money, and I'll survive is a very, very rare thing to have happen. And so I've enjoyed playing at lots of different places, and there's a local, I'd call them a community in a way, that beautiful bunch of people, quite healthy membership. Locally, if there's meetings, you can get a couple of hundred people along. And they have a lady that's quite a visionary kind of person. I'd say they're fairly new age, perhaps. And they invite me to sing my music up there. They came across an album of mine called Standing at the Cross, and they really appreciate the music, which was quite interesting because the themes aren't along the lines of the themes that they kind of espouse. But over the last 10 years, it's been interesting watching them grow, and the leadership of this lady that definitely would purport to have inspiration and visions and offer support and prophetic advice and this kind of thing. And I've, in that short time, have noted the wonderful contribution of the loving members of her community that permeate throughout our town. But I've been invited to sing up there many times. They buy a lot of my albums. And I've been in meetings where I've heard her talk about when she was in India. She was talking to one of her gurus, and in a moment she had in her hand a beautiful little chalice. I think they called a little kind of statue of Shiva. And while she was telling this story, she showed the little chalice to people in the audience, and I was standing there with my guitar ready for my little spot to sing. But within weeks, people were talking in that community about how that she had been kind of transported into a little bit of an ecstatic state, and her eyes were fluttering, and she opened her hands, and from nowhere came this statue. And so I'm seeing, and I'm thinking the whole time, I bet this is similar to early Ellen White stuff, where there's a loving community being built around it. There's a loving leader that, kind of guides the flock with inspiration. But already urban myths are starting to rise up. They have a songbook, and they use a lot of my songs in it. And I'm thinking, what happens in 100 years' time? What urban myths will grow around me, around them, around their community that builds?
Are your songs all Christian songs that they use?
Yeah, not all of them are Christian songs, but they're songs about love and hope and So, I'm only putting this story not to talk about me, but just to go. I'm kind of witnessing firsthand what perhaps was going on in the early days with some of what was happening around Ellen White, and how easy it is for urban myths to just, there they are.
It sounds like the lady that you're appointed with is not so much an authoritarian, though, as the...
No, but she has started developing disciples around her, and there have been splits because some people feel that she has been too interfering into their lives.
Okay. Meddling.
Yeah, and and she's a lovely person. Like I bumped into her the other day. I wouldn't be ashamed if she saw this interview. I think she's a lovely person and doing lots of good stuff. It's just an interesting thing to watch firsthand.
Never had a testimony for you, huh?
What's that?
She's never had a testimony for you.
She has, actually. And I just kind of sit back, and I'm the sort of person that won't sign up for anything.
Yeah, okay. I hear that.
Yeah. So anyway, sorry to kind of divert, and sorry to viewers to hear that story, but it's just a little interesting insight into how some of these things can evolve, and where they might be in 150 years' times, where we find ourselves. So back into your story, which is the focus here today. Do you know much about Palmdale, the 1976 kind of meetings at all? I've heard little bits, and there's a really good article by Gil Valentine that I've just started reading.
I remember there was one, but that was too much in the weeds, too much inside Adventist theological battles among. It was the theologians trying to get a little room from the administrators, probably. Right. Okay. Yeah, and they weren't getting enough. They never do, of course.
Yeah. Can we springboard into Glacier View and the 1979 Forum Des Ford meeting and the tapes? And then I kind of want to go into a little bit of the early 80s kind of problems the church had with the Ford, plagiarism, and Davenport. Those three were so big they made it into the Time magazine publication of, I think, 84. Kind of want to springboard into that. But can we just go, and then I want to talk a little about who watches, who cares, and misadventures in stewardship. So if we can kind of just do those three things, talk a little bit about 1979, the forum, how you get to know Des Ford, your thoughts on Glacier View, and then we'll springboard into those other two topics.
Well, I mentioned how we had invited him after Glacier View to our forum meeting. So that up to that point, I'd only had this correspondence with him regarding the nature of the atonement. That just didn't kind of go anywhere.
Okay.
And you're not going to change Des's mind about much of anything that he's been doing. I also became friends with, right after Glacier View, with Calvin Edwards, his first executive director.
Yeah, for GNU.
Another Aussie. Really like the guy.
Yeah.
And he's had an interesting journey.
Yeah, he was a school teacher of mine.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Have you followed his career since then?
Yeah, very interesting.
And whatever happened to Noel Mason?
Noel Mason doesn't ring a bell.
He was a classmate of Calvin's at seminary, and they left together. And
Right, yeah. I know the name, but because I knew Calvin, his name, whenever I've read stuff, stands out, but other names surrounding it less so.
yeah.
So what's the story there?
Well, I just wondered. I think he got depressed and kind of dropped out of the whole evangelica thing. I think those guys may have had something to do with starting the magazine Evangelica at seminary in 1980.
Okay.
I'm not positive about that.
Yeah, Jill will know.
Sure.
Yeah.
And there are some back issues probably in most Adventist libraries. But what was it that refocus me on what you wanted to...
So I want to kind of talk about your post-involvement Glacier View with Des and then touch on these other controversies at the time. But I'm just wondering what thoughts you had specifically of the forum meeting in 79, October 27, the one that the tapes went around the world. Then they had to get bigger and bigger venues for it to take place, and then leading into Glacier View itself. Just some memories around that. Even though it's not necessarily your focus, I'm just interested for your thoughts on it.
It's amazing how much time has passed since then, and I haven't been involved in the church that way since about 1990, except to redo these stories of financial misadventure. But I knew Bob Spangler fairly well, and he was the editor of Ministry Magazine, which so badly represented what happened at Glacier View in its first post-Glacier View issue. I was friends with his daughters. He and I exchanged letters once in a while. He published an article or two of mine in Ministry Magazine when I was so young and naive.
Wow.
That I look back at and kind of wince. They were apologetic.
Yeah.
And
they're part of the journey, though.
Yeah, and he would always complain to me when he said, "When I get your letters, I have to get a dictionary out to read them," and really was almost an anti-intellectual. He wasn't a very complicated thinker. He was a promoter and a positive and an organization man. So when I began to publish Adventist Currents, he just defriended me.
Wow.
And so I walked in on him one day at the GC around 85. I walked into his office and said, "Bob, what's with this nastiness? I mean, so we don't agree on some of this stuff.
Yeah.
I think Ellen's got problems. You don't want to believe it. I just can't. You're trying to damage the church." And I said, "I'm not trying to damage the church. I'm trying to help it be honest." I said, Christians believe that the truth will set us free.
Amen.
It might even set us free of some of our misguided assumptions or extrapolations from Scripture that our pioneers gave us. But what's wrong with that? Anyway, we finally got to the point where I just said to him, I said, you know, if you were, he said, when I read Ellen White, he said, I hear the voice of truth. I hear God speaking to me. It makes me a better father. It makes me a better husband. And I said, well, Bob, think if you, the very person you are, had been raised and lived in say a Muslim country. I said, you'd be doing what you're doing now, but you'd be doing it in regard to the Quran and the Hadiths and Allah.
Totally.
He says, well, maybe I would, but I would hope the Holy Spirit would lead me out of it. And, you know, when you think of the stony ground that neighborhood is, not likely.
No way.
So, there wasn't any.
Isn't it ironic that you were losing friends from the extreme of Walter Ray on one side and the other on the other side?
Meanwhile, for some reason, Neil Wilson got acquainted with our family when we first came back from Thailand in the Tacoma Park area. I don't know how that happened. I wasn't paying any attention to adults at that time. But he always would know me and ask me about my sisters by name and my parents by name. And I remember one time when I was first dating my wife in probably 1973 or 4, 5, I'm not sure where it was, but we were going up the back stairs to in the hospital tower here, one of the 3 towers that makes up Loma Linda University Hospital. And we were going up the back way instead of the elevator, and here comes Neil Wilson down the stairs. And I guess he was out for a board meeting or something. He said, Doug, how are you? You know, and who's this? I said, Jan. He said, how's Irene, and how's Jean, and how's Nancy, and how's Gail? And just, and my wife-to-be was just, this is the GC president? And so we had this silly, friendly relationship. But when I started publishing Currents, I would run into him every now and then. Sometimes I would make a point to. I would know where he was going to be, and I'd just kind of be in the way so I could get in one dig. And I remember one time I was wearing a Coors Light wife beater top and some shorts and sandals, and I was in the library, university library, Xeroxing stuff. It was hot summertime, and he goes by the outside door to the Xerox area in his 3-piece dark suit, and he happened to glance in as he goes by, and he stops and comes back in. Doug, what are you doing? You know, I said, Elder Wilson, I said, you sure aren't dressed for the weather, are you? You know, I was actually feeling kind of, geez, you know, I'm looking really scruffy. He said, well, we're having board meetings, and I've got to, I have to wear this. You know, he's defended himself. What are you doing? That's perfectly appropriate. I'm just giving you a hard time. Yeah, it was always a joshing kind of relationship until 1990, when he lost his presidency, and he attributed part of that to Adventist Currents. Wow. Because in 1990, I produced 2 8-page Adventist Currents newsletters. I resurrected it temporarily, that were basically just a compendium of the things that went wrong on his watch for the 12 years of his presidency. Wow. And I saw to it that they got into the hotel rooms of all the delegates at, where was that, GC? It was in the Superdome. Right. I had the bellboys. Put them in. And so all the delegates first day had these, wow, you know, and so they had ammunition, the ones that didn't want him. Yeah. And unfortunately, perhaps, Robert Falkenberg got into place. Well, I tell you what, hey, can you do something on his son's legacy, leading up to the next vote? I heard he's resigning. Ted Wilson? Well, I heard. Is it a rumor? I think that's a rumor. My prediction is he'll be president again. Really? Yeah. Well, he was like either a year behind me. No one agrees with me. He was either in my class or a year behind me at Columbia Union College, and he ran for student body president against a fellow named John Melnick, who now is a high-level muckety-muck in the American Medical Association. But I believe Melnick won. But Ted, at the time, you would never have imagined this is a guy that had any fire in the belly to be in control of things. He just smiled all the time. He wasn't involved in anything. He didn't seem to have much social skills. He was like a bar of soap. He had no game. You know, he didn't date. He didn't play sports. Never said anything much. Just seemed real pleasant.
Yeah.
And here he is.
Wow. You weren't thinking of Dan Jackson, were you, who's retiring, and he's president of the NAD?
No,
When did you hear that rumour?
just a day or two ago.
Well, maybe.
I'm trying to think where I heard it.
There'll be people watching today who can confirm or deny that. There'll be posts in the comment coming up any second now. That'll spoil my narrative if that happens.
But he's an obscurantist, as what Ray Cottrell would have called an obscurantist.
Explain that.
Oh, someone who doesn't let reliable information change his views. You know,
Right.
Isn't curious, isn't exploratory.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of these fellows that rise to this level of administrative leadership are by their nature not the kind of people who are curious and
Yeah.
concerned about epistemological
Yeah.
rigor.
Yeah.
They want the message and the
Yeah.
followers. And
I view myself as a street epistemologist.
is that, yeah? Well, that's good.
A
Dock worker's philosopher, huh?
yes, yeah. Does would you put that label on Neil Wilson? He was a very effective leader, but he seemed to be very clued into all sorts of beliefs and depths, and just chose to make his path kind of. You know, sometimes the most powerful leaders are the ones that have a lot more knowledge. They're not just kind of, but they choose a certain path.
Yeah, Neil Wilson was a sophisticated, cunning politician.
Yes, yes.
In fact, I will never forget what he said. I believe it was the first time he was elected president. It was probably 79 or 80 rather. He had inherited the position briefly from Robert Pearson when he resigned.
Yeah.
But when he was confirmed through the regular process in 80, comes to the lectern after the vote and says, "If my face appears drained of color, it is because I understand something of the sacredness of the vote that has just been taken."
My goodness.
Perfect pitch, politically. Perfect pitch.
Wow.
No, he's cool.
I met him. He was travelling through New Zealand when I'd graduated. I went to live in New Zealand for a while, and I was teaching at the school there. And he came and did a worship. Trying to think what year it would have been. Maybe 88, 89. When did he stop being president?
90.
Yes, that would have been 88, 89.
Yeah.
And I was too young to... I hadn't really... Ironically, I was kind of at ground zero of the whole Des Ford thing and studied at Avondale College, but the as I've said many times, the generation just above me, instead of staying and mentoring us young folk coming up, they all left the church. And so we didn't really start grasping what had gone on till the early 90s, as I said before. So I was a little bit naive, but I did ask him a question that kind of stumped him, which felt nice. But yeah, he came across as very affable. He remembered names. He knew my name somehow, and I don't know how, but
Unusual gift for names.
yeah. My dad has that gift.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's incredible to watch. You'll go to a family function where you haven't seen some distant cousins for a long time, and he'll mention all their names, their partners' names, their kids' names, just in conversation. He's not trying to be political; it just comes out. And that's for someone who is political, though, what a skill to have. Can you say that? Can you say that quote again that he said
If my face appears drained of color, it's because I understand something of the sacredness of the vote that has just been taken. I mean, that makes the voters feel good. Their votes are sacred.
Yeah.
It makes it makes the vote about him all the more meaningful.
Yeah, but it projects him as being quite humble.
Oh yes, all at the same time.
That is very clever. Hey, I want to come back to a little bit about Neil, just to kind of finish a little bit of before I dig into a couple of your books. Can you talk? Did you have friends or acquaintances or work mates that became friends later that were at Glacier View? You mentioned Spangler, but were there other people?
Well, I knew people who were there for sure
Yeah.
because I
How
was
old were you? How old were you in 1980, if you don't mind me asking?
I was born in 47, so I was 43.
Yeah. Okay.
No, 33.
33. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
So,
definitely old enough to really know what's going on.
well, I'd started to, and the people I knew who were there, of course, was Ray Cottrell, who wrote the Spectrum article about what took place there, and he knew shorthand, so he'd taken pretty copious notes. I imagine they were quite reliable.
Yeah.
I knew Richard Hamill, who organized the whole thing.
Yeah.
Um, one of the most interesting things to me about that is Harry Lowe was a high-level SDA administrator for many years, and in 1962, then President Reuben Figuer, who preceded Robert Pearson, Reuben Figuer authorized a committee, a secret committee of Adventist scholars to meet and try to understand the problems or solve the problems with the SDA doctrine of the sanctuary. And it happened because the Review and Herald editor at the time, the one who authorized the commentary or helped run the commentary production with Ray Cottrell and Don Neufeld, who was the Review and Herald editor at that time. Oh man.
Someone will write it in the comments. No doubt there's a link to the Spectrum article by Cottrell as well by now.
Anyway, Cottrell in 1958 had written a letter to 27 of the SDA religion teachers, anyone who had some knowledge, and several had quite a bit, of biblical Hebrew regarding the SDA interpretation of the Hebrew term nisdak in Daniel 8:14 and verses 9 through 13. They all wrote back. Not one believed they could make the interpretation work without extra biblical authority. I've read all the letters. I mean, there are people like Ted Heppenstall, Siegfried Horn, Graham Maxwell, Sakai Kubo, Richard Hamill, Don Neufeld, the other editor of the Earl Hilgert, W.G.C. Murdoch. These guys all wrote back to this little survey that Ray sent them, and the survey said, "What linguistic basis is there for translating nisdak as cleansed? Why did the translators of the Septuagint render nisdak as katharis satai, rather? Now, what's the relationship of nisdak to its context in verses 9 through 13? How would you render it in terms of its context? What linguistic, contextual, or other reason would you offer for applying nisdak in Daniel 8:14 to the services of the Day of Atonement, and thus to the investigative judgment beginning in 1844? Every single one of them wrote back and said they couldn't do it.
Wow.
So after a bit of back and forth, Figuer authorizes this secret committee of heavyweights to meet and discuss. And Des Ford ended up contributing 3 papers to this.
What would we call this meeting? Because I'm fascinated by it. This is another area that I'm wanting to expand my knowledge on. How would people refer to this secret committee? What's it called?
Well, Ray would refer to it as the Daniel Committee, but it was secret. And it went from 62 to 66.
Yes.
And it met a number of times.
Yeah. This is the one where the minutes weren't kept or something. Is that right?
I'm not sure about that, but at the end, Harry Lowe, who was the administrative overseer of the committee, was trying to get a majority opinion to agree on and to report something back to the GC president that was positive. And there were several on the committee, minority, who said we can't honestly do that, and they ended up Ray ended up drafting a minority report.
Right.
And so they ended up disbanding without any report. But Harry Lowe threatened the minority quite bluntly and directly What's interesting about that is that was 66 when that happened. Now we come to Glacier View being organized by Richard Hamill. And one of the invitees that he sent out a letter to was Harry Lowe, who's now an old retired man. And Harry Lowe writes back, and we have his letter. And in his letter, he mulls over the fact that in all the years since the committee, he has tried. He knows many others who've tried, and none of them can make this thing work without extrabiblical assistance. And he says, you got to wonder, maybe is it that important if we can't do it? And he begs off attending for health reasons because it's up 10,000 feet. But he changed his opinion quite a bit. And this letter, a portion of the letter, appears in a paper that Richard Hamill wrote quite a few years after Glacier View, in which he sets down his whole view of the sanctuary doctrine and of the effort by Richard Davidson in his 1981 doctoral dissertation and 2 subsequent Ministry Magazine articles in 1984 attempting to be as an apologetic for the Adventist view. And Hamill undresses it in this 30, 40-page paper, and undresses Davidson quite bluntly.
Wow.
And some of that will appear in the work I'm doing on Cottrell and Glacier View in that chapter.
The work you're doing, what's coming out? What are you working on?
Well, it's frustrating, but Ray Cottrell died in 2003, and he agreed to have me be his biographer. I started before he died, and I had some interviews and a lot of his papers. And as I got into the project, I realized that his life was primarily, the biggest thing in his life was this whole question of the sanctuary doctrine. It came to be. It happened when they were working when he and Don Neufeld were working on the portions of the Bible commentary that pertained to our view of Hebrews and Daniel, Leviticus. They couldn't make it work, and so they dodged and dissembled in the commentary. But he has tried and tried. He tried after that and ever since to somehow make it work, and never could. But
was he on the Daniel Report committee?
Oh yes, in fact, he wrote the minority report that Lowe was so mad about it.
Right.
in 1966.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Where was I going?
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah. Working on the Cottrell biography.
Yeah.
As I was going through his life and talking to him and seeing all the trajectory of his career and where he'd been and what he'd done, this was always the thing that he kept coming back to that mattered the most to him, that in questions on doctrines, he was one of the people behind the scenes that was trying to help them improve that. He was giving counsel to the Froome, Reed, and Anderson while they were talking to the evangelicals, Martin and Barnhouse.
Wow.
Counseling them by night before their meetings.
I did not know that. That's very interesting.
A lot of that.
Wow.
Well, I've written all this up in great detail. In fact, several years ago, there was a colloquium of a long weekend of people who had all been assigned papers about the book Questions on Doctrines and the issues involved. And they all met for a weekend at Herb Douglas, for instance, was. In fact, I saved Herb Douglas great embarrassment because he mixed up one Cottrell for another in a quote that he was using. It was Ray's illustrious uncle who he was quoting, very much a right-winger.
That's lucky.
Yeah, and so Herb was grateful when I said, listen, that's not, it's RFC, but it's not Raymond. I forget what his name was, but the chapter I've written already, Ray gives me the excuse to go down these rabbit trails to these semi-major events in Adventist theological history behind the scenes. And so I have written a very thorough discussion of how the book Questions on Doctrines came to be, how it came to be the way it was, and who was behind the scenes doing what. And there's it's really fascinating. Wow. And but I haven't. I've got up to the Glacier View story, and I'm partway into it. And man, my favorite character in all of that's Robert Parr.
Really? Yeah.
He wrote a letter to Duncan Eva
Yeah.
before Glacier View, because Duncan Eva had sent him a letter to publish in the Record.
Yeah. That's what we call it. Yeah.
And Parr interpreted his understanding of what Duncan Eva had written. He read more into it than there was there, maybe even.
Right.
And he just bared his soul and his anger and his frustration and his
Wow.
in letter to
Reply.
to Eva.
And you've seen this letter.
Oh, I have it. It's so colorful. Oh, it's so colorful.
He's a very good writer.
And he's saying if Ford's going to be crucified, what about Cottrell?
Yes.
Because Cottrell was on the speaking circuit saying slideshow of the same stuff explicitly,
Exactly.
Anyway, so one's the Lord's goat, and one's Parr was having fun,
Yeah.
And so I weave that in, but that's where I'm at. What I spent most of my time was a book-length manuscript that really it's about 400 pages that covers Ray's progenitors, because his great-great-grandfather was one of the earliest Adventist pioneers who came in just after the shut door era was winding down. Otherwise, he couldn't have come in.
Right. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
He came in 1849. Wait a minute. Yeah, 48, 49, and his religious roots were his dad and were a combination of Christian Connection and Seventh-day Baptist. So they were very libertarian theologically. If you held a meeting to talk about issues and where the church was going to go next and what we believed, you would burn the minutes so that they wouldn't have any impact on the next meeting. They were so freedom seeking, and then of course he had the Sabbath already, and he had James White was a Christian Connection minister. So was I think Andrews, Bates. Anyway, so this is all in my 400-page history of the early Adventist church
Where can we get a copy of that?
Through the eyes of Roswell Fenner Cottrell, because he wrote about 1,700 articles for the Review and Herald between 1849 and 1892 when he died.
Wow.
And he was so involved in reprimands from Ellen White over his position on creating a church formally. They didn't believe in formalizing churches and having a name and a corporation. No. This was, and then the question of whether to have a creed.
Yeah. And
whether to serve in the Civil War. And you can't believe how bad Ellen comes off in the Civil War period. I mean,
really?
James White actually publishes an article on the front page of one of the reviews at the time. A lady from England, I think, named Boate, B-O-A-T-E was her last name. And many years earlier, she had written a poem that explicitly describes the Civil War, who's in it, how horrible it will be, sons and daughters and families in the North and the South, and how it will end. And they couldn't get Ellen for the whole 2 or 3 years to come down anywhere on much of anything that they were struggling over deciding what to do. So it's fascinating history.
And how can we get a hold of that 400-page?
I have to publish it.
So that's not published either.
No, it's been waiting for me to finish the Ray part of it. So I want people to understand how Ray got to be Ray.
Yes.
And how interesting it is that the issues that matter to him now, how they came to be issues.
Yeah. So that will be two separate books?
Maybe. So I start with, the seventh month movement, with in 1843 and 44, and then show Ellen and James and coming in, but all along the way, I tell you and show you things that you never knew about Adventist history or about Ellen.
We've got to hear this stuff now.
So I hope next
take a holiday for a month and finish it all off.
Oh, a month! I've got to take next year to try to finish it up. This year I'm finishing another project that has nothing to do with the church.
Okay. Do you have a publisher? Because we're setting up SDAQ&A as a little mini publishing house, so maybe we can talk later.
That might be something. Yeah, that'd be nice.
There's definitely a bit of a lightning rod happening around the podcasts, and we haven't even gone public on YouTube or the podcasts yet with this series, so that's going to start happening in the next couple of weeks. And I've got a girl who's setting up our website, where we'll be setting up deals with writers and publishers where people can purchase the products from the website, and the shopping cart will split a percentage to the author and some to us to help our running of the program.
Sure.
I've got big dreams.
One thing you'll enjoy if I ever get the Cockrell book finished is...
Oh, please don't say if you ever. Say when.
I have a long section on his 10 or 12 years at PUC as a teacher.
Right.
And that's where he starts the biblical research fellowship, Bible Research Fellowship, which finally ends up being co-opted by the GC as the Biblical Research Institute or something, you know. But it started at PUC without any general conference involvement. Just the religion teachers all over the country contributing and sharing articles. And it gets Ray in trouble. But part of what gets him in trouble is Lewis Wurr, who's been thrown out of the church by now. He comes to the 1950 GC session in San Francisco, but fellowships with the the Bible religion teachers of the denomination who've come to the GC session. They meet together for a weekend on their own at PUC afterwards and talk issues.
Wow.
And Lewis Wurr is there, and he goes home and says, "Oh, they all agree with me on this, this, and this," and they're contentious things, of course. And but by the time we're through the story, at least the 2020, 21, 22 reader will have totally rehabilitated the reputation of Lewis Wurr, because he was so wronged by the institutional church that defamed him, his personal character, to get rid of him.
Far out. See, that's kind of the MO, isn't it? Of what they do. But
that's just the nature of the sociology of institutions, whether it's a union, an association, a church, a school, a government.
It's like people. It's something that happens, and it almost makes you want to not cast blame on the individuals, because it's that carry out these kind of dastardly activities. Because if it wasn't them, it's whoever has that position, because those systems create these kind of it's like a corporation that almost runs like an individual without an individual actually running it anymore. And these people that do the terrible things are just figureheads in many ways. That's why I don't like to attack the...
They're playing a role.
People, yeah.
I remember as a senior in high school, I was reading all of the James Bond novels in my last few weeks of high school.
Yeah, as you do.
I was not going to school. I was there, but I remember a line that stuck with me that Ian Fleming wrote. He said, "Only cream and bastards rise to the top." And there's not much cream.
Yeah. It's, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Is there anything more you wanted to say about Glacier View before I ask you about some of your books?
Just that, Glacier View was a pathetic abuse of truth and fairness and legitimate Bible scholarship. I mean, even if you agree generally about the nature of inspiration and revelation, no legitimate, consistent exegetical tool will give you what we came up with in the investigative judgment. And of course, I don't take the scriptures anywhere near as literally as the people do who argue about that. I don't. I mean, if you haven't read Richard Carrier, and if you haven't read Friedman, who wrote the Bible, Carrier's book is about the historicity of Jesus, you can't understand why people who will have a different view than you about the likelihood of those people and events being the way they're portrayed.
Mm.
But the people who know those things are very lonely then, because they know things and base their speculation and their best guess about reality on a lot more information than most of the ones that speak very confidently about the reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will come back to Glacier View a little bit towards the end, because there's a couple of things I want you just to unpack from your perspective on Neil Wilson a little bit there. But before we come back to that, can you just talk a little bit, and before we talk about your books, what kind of inspiration did you gain from Des, watching him go through that, from his writings, his thoughts, how he handled himself? Did he inspire you as a speaker, that kind of thing?
Oh, I'm really impressed with his gift of oratory. I have no gift in that direction, so it's something to just gawk at. I couldn't believe that sometimes I wished he was not so willing to, and it seemed to me he was pretending to be kindly and ironic about his reminiscence about what happened to him at Glacier View. He would always attribute the best motives to these fellows, recognizing that they weren't scholars, but he talks as though their motives aren't bad, that they're doing the best they can, and he doesn't seem willing to include in his assessment of Ellen White many things that are there to be known about her that, to me, detract from her integrity as a person.
Do you think, though, by doing that, he created a path for those of us to follow behind that are more interested in kind of exposing a lot of that stuff, a path of graciousness that went deeper? If he'd done it a little bit more to the Walter Ray side of things, we may not have had the doors open to us to be able to pop off the
well,
targets on the road.
My problem was that he had a lot of people who, for very good reason, almost worshipped him and his message, who then were left thinking that maybe Ellen White was better than she was because he wouldn't.
Yeah, okay.
That concerned me some, and I thought maybe he did not want to have a legacy of being just another D.M. Canwright.
Right.
He didn't want the brethren to have an excuse that he was a malcontent or angry, and if so, I think he succeeded in that regard. Not that they'll let him get away with it, but
and I do feel like doors have opened because of his graciousness for us to have conversations like this.
Really?
On his behalf, in a way. Like I'm not in any way disparaging his process, but if I was a strategist, advising him on how to most effectively not attack, but put a dent into the Adventist Church for its wrongs to people, I would advise the gracious approach and allow the lieutenants and soldiers to follow in behind with conversations like this.
Well, as you've probably thought, the Adventist Church, to me, over the last 30 or 40 years has become much larger, but the proportion of people in the church who even go the places where you're trying to go in your thinking and visiting and reading and considerations, there's very little of that. I mean, the only people who were doing that, as far as I know, were Westerners of a semi-intellectual bent, who were curious and believed in the tools of investigation and rational approaches to. As we become an increasingly postmodern society, I don't think the young people are nearly as concerned about epistemological rigor.
No.
And add to that the fact that most of the growth in the population of the Adventist Church has been third world, which is not inclined by its own history, intellectual history, to do those things. So I don't see much hope in the future for
I don't see much hope in the future for the Adventist Church to proceed in the way it has for the last 40 years. Something has got to give.
Yeah.
But I do see hope in the kind of conversations that we're having, that I know young people are watching and starting to get an idea of how fascinating this is and how it's very important. That's why I kind of jokingly call myself a street epistemologist, because if you can encourage people to share their beliefs and then be challenged why they believe, and then be encouraged to defend those beliefs in a conversation, the very act of doing that creates a whole new kind of interest that young people seem to be gravitating to. I would think that, and I'm getting lots of emails from people from these programs, which are still only in our private group. I had an email from a guy before we even started Glacier View series, who was head elder of a very conservative church about 50 miles from here, and he joined the group with the expressed desire to have a go at me and to really influence the Liberals in the group with a more conservative approach and tell them the truth. He's now literally left the church and is involved with this, and I'm seeing percolating under that a whole lot of young people who previously were like, oh, we don't even care about the investigative judgment. Why are you even bothering? You've left the church. How can you even influence the church? You can't influence the church unless you're there. They're growing up and they're very fascinated and interested in it. So I don't see that activity and that kind of action taking place as being an indication that the church will somehow then become miraculously healed and progress in a fluid and wonderful, meaningful way. But I see it as a way to just put the spotlight on people's reasons for being, and maybe on an individual level create a kind of a life that's more meaningful with purpose for them. It's just something I'm observing, as something I accidentally fell into during the COVID isolation, running these interviews, picking up where I'd left behind on the podcast, which weren't hugely effectual. I'm just seeing some really positive developments springing up out of it.
Well, at the beginning of our conversation, I'm not sure it was recording or not, you were mentioning the women's ordination issue and the vote that was taken. And that seems pretty obscurantist, social culturally, to not give it up. But I have another reaction to that is, while I think it's childish to not allow people to fill those roles regardless of their sex, it frustrates me that the same church, or people I know well in the same church who are more quote unquote liberal, more woke, more sophisticated, like I imagine myself to be. A lot of them who are so concerned about women's ordination won't express even much sympathy for all the women of the Islamic world who have it 100 times worse, and in so many categories of life. They don't have,
I know what you mean. Yeah. And I certainly don't think that I'm contributing to conversation that will alleviate and encourage great things, but hopefully in a small way there's a little bit of real awakening, not the wokeness that you're talking about. I'm not
woke in the sense of what that word really means.
No, me either. Interesting that you're saying what you just said about the treatment of women in other places.
Yeah.
There was an interesting BBC program on. I won't mention countries or names or get myself into trouble there, but there's a group of people being systematically shut down by the government in parts of this country, and
Oh, I'm sorry. Which? Oh, the country you're talking about.
the country I'm talking about, and
Gotcha.
they're being indoctrinated out of their faith,
Yeah.
forced to shave their beards, and women are being sterilized if they don't change their beliefs,
I know what you're
so
talking
that
about.
eventually, and I just think, and I was I'm a fan of, there's an Australian TV show called Q&A, and I'm a huge fan of that. In fact, one of my friends works at the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and she gets me in there into the audience sometimes. I've even asked a couple of questions on the show.
Oh, yeah.
And one show just before Christmas, I was sitting next to one of these ladies from one of these communities from this country.
Wow.
And pre-show, we just had this fascinating conversation. And it worries me that these terrible things are happening. And if you look at the Adventist Women's Ordination, and I've often gotten into trouble because I'm saying I think there's more that we could do that would be way more effective in ensuring this kind of thing doesn't happen. And it worries me that in many ways it's a cultural issue. It'll probably change.
Yeah.
But if we can't even speak up for those things, how could we ever expect to be Sister Rosa and stand up and refuse to go to the back of the bus? How could we even begin to think of standing up for these women in this country? Because we're too scared to, you know?
How can we get Apple to stop using slave labor
Yeah.
in the same place?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're digressing a bit, but this is a conversation. You know, if people think this is a formalized,
Didn't we
efficient.
map this out ahead of time?
What's that?
Didn't we map this out ahead of time?
Yeah. I'm notorious for not sticking to maps. My wife's Irish, and before I met her, I love Ireland and Irish music, and I travelled there in the early 2000s, and I hopped off the plane, got into the first bus, went to whichever town it went to, and I spent 4 weeks travelling around Ireland with no plan, and it was just fantastic. It was just
The Irish saved civilization, as you know.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Have you read the little book, How the Irish Saved Civilization?
Oh, I have. Amazing. Yeah. Incredible.
My wife and my two daughters took a trip like you did to Ireland
Yeah.
a few years ago, and they just had a great time.
Yeah, it's incredible. And my wife's from Cork, and her not too distant future, I think her grandmother can tell some pretty interesting stories about the Republican movement and you know, the war against the British, and they know suppression and oppression way more than Adventists do. Interesting. Anyway, we've sidetracked, but that's totally fine, and I make no apologies for that because these are very enjoyable conversations. I wanted to talk a little bit about your books, particularly Who Watches, Who Cares, and Misadventures in Stewardship. You know, you've written about the administration of the church, and why have you been interested in this? And can you tell us a little bit about both of those books?
I'm only aware of one book, but anyway.
Oh, sorry.
Magazine of books?
I just read I think the subtitle as a second book.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Tell
Tell us about Who Watches, Who Cares.
I was hired to write that book
Oh, really?
by a few doctors who got together and wanted
I'll
to
just hold it up again.
Yeah, you can get it on Amazon if you try.
Yeah, I read that as a second book.
Oh yeah, these doctors got together and ran by those stories with me, and I knew the basic outlines of all of them already. And they just wanted me to, they held a meeting at the university church in its side chapel one Sabbath afternoon for a large audience that everybody had 8 minutes to, 8 different people took 8 minutes each to, I'm sorry, 6 or 7 different people took 8 minutes each to summarize the stories at the time. And then they talked to me about, man, make a good, would you edit that stuff and put it together for a little booklet we can. And as I started looking at it, I started thinking about how much more it could be. And I told them, and they said, well, we'll pay you. So I took a year and a reasonable amount of money, wrote the book. And recently, one of the ringleader of these doctors came to me, and we went to lunch, and he said, we have the money if you want to write another one. We'd like to. I'm not interested, but and I have a job that's more than full time now, especially with COVID. I'm doing someone else's work as well that's been furloughed,
Yeah.
So I have to keep my health plan, but now more than ever.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so this it was kind of a kick to. It's always fun to be able to get stuff you're not supposed to have.
Yeah.
And get it out there. And the worry was when I was writing this, if you look at the name, there's a name index at the back. So the worry was when I was putting this together and getting ready to publish was that we would get sued.
Oh.
But there's, I don't know, 1,300 endnotes in there. Everything that's controversial that I assert has a primary document practically.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are made to look very bad in this book, but I was banking on 2 things. One, that I've been really careful and had the truth. Number 2, that most of these people were church workers, and none of them, the church doesn't want a lawsuit because it generates more bad press about these very things.
Yeah.
So anyway, I've never heard boo.
You never had any problems with it?
No. The Andrews University has a publication they put out once or twice a year, reviewing books that they picked it up, and I couldn't believe their review of it. It was just utterly pathetic. They were saying how accurate and careful and legitimate it was, and then they said I had defamed all the people in the book.
Yeah.
So how can it be accurate and careful? I defamed them. And these were the reviewers were PhD professors in the business school.
Yeah.
Who should know a little bit about business law by now.
Yeah. It's just their way to put you down.
Well, uncover themselves, maybe. I don't know.
The doctors that kind of helped to fund this then and collate it or put it together, are they mentioned in the book?
Yeah.
Or they wanted to remain private?
No, at the beginning there are people that are thanked.
Because you've mentioned there's concluding essays by Frank Nittle, Arden Clark, and Stuart Schenkel.
Stuart Schenkel was one of them.
Right.
But at the front, acknowledgments, I think.
Right.
There's a whole lot of names. Thanked one at a time.
Yes. Yeah.
And Gary Murray and Stuart Schenkel, Richard Sheldon.
Yeah.
And trying to see if the ringleaders here. George Grames was the real energy behind this project.
George Grames.
Yeah, Grames. And
where's he now? Is he still alive?
Oh yeah, he's around. He's the guy that took me to lunch. Can we do another one?
Yeah. I mentioned earlier, and I was watching an Ankerberg show where he was talking to Des Ford and Walter Ray.
Yeah, a long time ago. Wow.
Yeah, I think 84, 82, something like that. Now, I'm watching this show on YouTube, of course, years later, and I'd been very aware of Davenport's situation.
High resolution, I bet.
What's that?
High resolution, I bet.
Yeah. And so, I was aware of the Davenport thing. I'd spent a fair bit of time looking into it. I'd read The Pirates of Privilege, which apparently Walter Ray had his what do they call it, the sustentation threatened when he retired, and so he promised that if they restored that, he wouldn't release Pirates of Privilege. But I think his son put it on the internet. I've read that anyway. But I remember Ankerberg at the time referring to Time magazine, I think, and he mentions Ellen White plagiarism, the Davenport fiasco, and the Des Ford issue as being the big three thing, and he referred to it as Adventism at the crossroads, which implies that it's going to go one way or the other. But I think the church was pretty effective at kind of just suppressing it all, and like you've experienced, just ostracizing the players and criticizing them, so that people think, oh well, that's going to be garbage to read. But I really wanted you just to unpack for our viewers and listeners your understanding of the Davenport conflict.
Well, that was a case in which union and conference officers and some college presidents, totaling around 140 individuals, had been over the years leading up to the late 70s lending money, their own money, to a physician-turned-developer named Don Davenport for exceptionally high interest rates. And then it turned out that most of these people were in a position to see to it that Davenport got large loans at low interest rates from church institutions, conferences, unions, colleges. And so they put their institutions' finances at risk because they wanted the high interest rates for their own personal accounts. And then when the rains came, and Davenport turned out to be somewhat of a pyramid scheme. One loan was paying for another. When the economy went bad, everybody was left hanging out, and it was amazing that nothing in the end was done to any of these people. Some of them got letters of reprimand, but if you read the letter of reprimand that's quoted in the book, I mean, you can hardly find the reprimand in there. You really can hardly find it. I mean, it's like, oh, yeah, it's just.
And I, in the interview I did with Bill Johnson, I touched on the Davenport thing, and I said that somewhere I'd written that Neil Wilson had promised that there would, heads would roll, or there'd be some accountability anyway to the players.
He did.
And but that I said to him, where was there any accountability? And I think he answered it in that there were 5 or 6 names that they were going to put forward, but last minute they decided not to. And he felt glad that he didn't, because it turned out I think 1 or 2 of those names later actually hadn't done anything of an illegal nature or something, and so it would have actually defamed them had they gone ahead. But I would have thought there'd be some kind of accountability.
A lot of this was not about illegality so much as
stupidity,
as really unethical stewardship of the church's tithe and offerings.
Because I think one of the things that I really was shocked by, we call them Ponzi schemes over here, and pyramid schemes.
Sure.
In the last 10, 20 years, there's been a few Adventist administrators and leaders that have fallen for Ponzi schemes.
Yes.
And had to extend their retirement years just to kind of cover the costs. And I just feel sorry for them, they just fell for it. But what really shocked me about Davenport is that they were using these loans, which is essentially church money. And I read somewhere that it was up to $20 million, as in late 70s $20 million, which whatever that's worth now. Can you verify that at all?
I forget the figures. There are some attempts to guess at the financial amounts in the book.
Yeah.
It's been 13 years since I wrote the book, and I haven't been. But, Bill Johnson is an interesting character. He was a fairly sophisticated thinker, a very capable editor and writer. He had a bit of a temper. And he and I we had several occasions when we were at loggerheads, and he had misunderstood some things that he got over, and then we had a rapprochement. But then again, at the very last, I was so disappointed. The most popular article ever published in the Adventist Review was called "God Was Ready the Day the Banks Closed," and it's been run 4 or 5 times in the review since, I think the first time might have been in 1979. And it's a miracle story of how the under treasurer at the GC was stashing away cash in boxes in his office here and there, and then one Friday afternoon, when he's going to New York City on the train, as he did every other week, to wire from a bank there all of the General Conference's mission budget allocations to all the workers' pay every other week. He, on this particular occasion, he didn't know why he was doing it, but he wired 3 months worth of mission budgets to all the overseas missions. And he came back that Friday night on the train and got back to Tacoma Park and slept in that morning, didn't go to church, woke up to hear the paper boy outside on the street yelling, "Read all about it, read all about it." And the banks had closed. FDR had just become president, and he had declared a banking holiday in 1933 in January after his inauguration. And because they were afraid of runs on the banks, and for some reason the financial exigencies that were going around at the time. And so the thrust of the story is that a miracle had taken place. He had been impressed to provide the missions because the banks were closed for 3 months, and there was no ability to wire funds all that time, and the missions would have been just in a terrible, terrible state of affairs if they didn't have their regular income from the GC. Well, it turned out, if you go back and read history at all, that there was a banking holiday at that time, and it was a maximum of 10 days. So there was no miracle needed. Even if all the other part of the story could be true, it was unnecessary. And one of my guys, a good friend, Dennis Hokama, who was working with me on Adventist Currents, we had prepared a thorough deconstruction of that story for the next issue of Currents that never came out. And so years later, well into the 90s, I'm in the Heritage Room at Loma Linda, and I see, I'm thumbing through some reviews in the 90s, and I just happened upon this story. God was written. Anyway, and there's a little thing at the bottom. They're publishing it again because it's so popular a story and blah, blah, blah. And so I wrote Bill a letter and sent him a copy of my friend's story as it had been prepared with the appendices, with all the documents, both from Treasury and from history and from newspapers that demonstrate what actually happened, and that this is totally unnecessary if it was true at all. And I just wrote to him nicely and said, you know, I've been an editor, and I know how I would feel if I found myself running a bogus story. I wouldn't want to do it again. I said, you know, so I'm sending you this material so you can. Long story short, a number of letters back and forth, and a year and a half or so later, and him writing me and saying he had a professional historian look at it, and they were putting their stamp of approval on the story. And I said, Bill, how, you know, it doesn't matter what some professional historian told you, that you've got the evidence there. You know that there was no miracle required. The banks didn't shut. You could wire funds from Tacoma Park if you wanted to. from Suburban Bank across the street there. I mean, I banked there myself. And what happens? They put out a story in the review defending the story by Merle Poyer. There's a guy named Poyer who worked as an assistant at the White Estate for quite a long time. I guess his wife, Merle Poyer. And they start off talking about how this guy, Dennis Hokama, wrote this thing to hurt the church or to damage the church. And they had absolutely no reason to mention his name. He had never published anything. I sent his material to Bill Johnson to help him avoid repeating this mistake another time. And they have the gall to defame my friend. And then what she had done was found little details in the story that appeared to be real and true at the time. Not the main thrust, but you know. And one of the things was the guy coming back from New York, and about how the traffic was so heavy, they got held up 2 or 3 hours on some bridge going from New York to back out of the city, and they provided as evidence a New York newspaper for that Friday night, the Friday night edition of a New York newspaper for that date, to prove that the traffic had been so heavy. You see how they goofed?
Yeah,
The
incredible.
next night, maybe they could report it. They can't report it. I mean, they did 2 or 3 things that stupid in trying to defend this story, and there was no reason to bring it up and mention Hokama, my friend, and accuse him of something he hadn't done. And
See, in the end, by defending these kind of actions, they're making themselves look worse. They'd be better to go. They'd be better to go. Oh, yeah, that's right. But now they do.
But Bill Johnson's final. You should see the letter I wrote him. I wrote him a barn burner, and he wrote back and said, "Well, Doug, you know, you write with great power, and blah blah blah, but you know, you just might be wrong."
Yeah.
So I have trouble respecting the intellectual honesty of the guy.
Yeah.
He has some nice qualities, but boy,
Has he defended Des, do you think, or has he
he's
quietly?
waffled. He's been
Yeah.
a quisling, you know.
It's
He
interesting.
knows better. He knows better. He's got he has a good PhD from a good university in biblical studies.
Yeah, yeah. It's
So-
interesting in his later years, and in the interview we had with him, he's very much focusing and helping an Adventist kind of. They're now an independent group called the One Project, and they're very much trying to focus on Jesus and
Oh, okay.
and bring it all back to, you know. But I sometimes think that you are allowed to focus on Jesus and all this stuff as well. You're allowed to turn over stones, especially if your motivation is to just be honest and authentic and go, well, this happened and we just got to deal with it, and here we are, and providentially, whatever. There's some good things.
One thing it'd be nice to mention, since you've given me this format for a few minutes, is I should mention along these lines that in the 3rd, I think, issue of Adventist Currents, you'll find a story called The Greening of Graybill, where he loses his job at the White Estate because they became aware of the dissertation he'd written about Ellen White called The Power of Prophecy at Johns Hopkins for his fulfillment of his requirements, and tried to hide the fact that he completed it from his bosses. Arthur White.
I think Ron Numbers mentioned that in my interview with him. Was it that he'd sent, the kind of 2 publications, and one was more for Adventists and one was more for the university?
Not to begin with, when I became aware that he published a dissertation or was graduating, I thought, oh, I'll publish just a news notice in my journal that something positive has happened, that there's a new, and I heard it was about Ellen White. So I called him up, never having had any contact with him in my life, and said, I'd like to have the title of your dissertation and maybe just a sentence or 2 from you from what it's about, so we can publish a positive news item in Adventist Currents. And his reaction was, I don't think I want anything about me or my dissertation to appear in your magazine ever. Just, nasty. And so after we talked a while, and he accused me of some things that the Spectrum crowd thought I had done in getting their mailing list. Actually, I traded it with a couple of their board members for a list of all the medical doctors in the denomination and all the dentists and all the lawyers. It was a straight across trade. I didn't realize that they hadn't cleared it with their board. But anyway, that was one of several things. So I hung up and called the registrar at Johns Hopkins and got the dissertation title, then called the department and got the dissertation number, and then called Michigan University and ordered 2 copies of it. That's where they all go. There's a place called University Microfilms. And in short order, I had 2 copies and started preparing a review of it. He heard about it. But I loaned 1 copy to one of my board members, a lady who worked at the library here at Loma Linda and was a friend of Walter Ray's. And I think she sent it to him so he could copy it or whatever. All I know is I didn't know it, but it started getting around. And Graybill calls me up after I had had that one conversation and just ready to sue me or kill me or something. He was just furious. I said, I don't have anything to do with that. I ordered it from University Microfilms and I am going to review it. Well, you can't. It's copyrighted and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, he wouldn't tell me. And what I didn't know was that he had this problem, that he had been used all kinds of things in it that were not manuscript released by the White Estate. Because I had followed their rules regularly. When I wanted something from the White Estate to quote that wasn't published before, I would go through that process and I was always turned down, but I never broke their rules.
Right.
He had access to everything in the vault for years.
And he'd used it in his thesis.
Yes. So I didn't know he had that vulnerability. He knew it and he was scared to death.
Oh.
But he wouldn't tell me, hey, Doug, this is what I've done. I really need you to, if you're a decent guy at all, to help me. Yeah, I would have worked with him. Because I know he was sharing things here and there with other scholars around the denomination that he had access to.
Right.
He could have done me a few favors and things would have been fine. But anyway, he didn't tell me. He just threatened me with lawsuits and blah, blah, blah. So I went ahead and reviewed it. And but him knowing that the review was coming out and knowing that the dissertation had gotten loose, he revised it and gave it to his bosses, which was smart to get ahead of it. But somehow they found out that it wasn't identical.
And these are the 2 versions now that I was talking about.
Yes, exactly. And they found out it wasn't identical. And that was what lost him his job. They would have forgiven his breaking all those rules if he hadn't tried to deceive them. Mm. And so the review announced, some months later that Ron Graybill was being released to go to a job at the union office, being the publisher of the union paper, like Bob Parr,
Yeah.
And that the state that the board had voted 11 to 7, or it was a 4-person margin. They voted to release him, but they didn't go into any of the whys and wherefores. So I called Bob Olson, who was the head of the White Estate at the time. And I said, Bob, I want to know about something, or I wanted to share something with you. But before I do that, I want to thank you and Bill Johnson and Charles Bradford and somebody from Australia, I think. Anyway, for voting to keep Ron, even in spite of all that he did. So what I had done is look at the White Estate board list, and knowing there were 4 who'd voted for him, and knowing the men I picked these 4 and thanked him for all that. Him and Johnson and Bradford and one other, I think it was Spangler, I don't know. And there was a silence on the line, and he says, how do you know that? How do you know that already? I said, well, I know it now. One of my favorite moments as an investigative journalist.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I had Bob Olson for a professor at PUC in Pauline epistles, and we didn't get on well. And that's how I ended up naming the company Mars Hill